All right. How's everyone doing today? So this is the first time that this presentation's being given to the public, so I'm really curious to see how it's going to go. I want you all to picture this, okay? A cancer patient is laying in the hospital somewhere, and there is a doctor, there's a few nurses attending to this patient, and they get a phone call. The doc picks up the phone, comes over to the nurses, comes over to the patient and says, "Hey, sir, I'm really sorry, but your insurance has denied the procedure that we are about to perform on you." And then the patient says, "Well, why? I've been in perfect health." The doc says, "Well, you submitted your DNA for some sort of ancestry check several years ago, and there's a very high probability that even if we give you this new liver, that it will fail in the next several years." This scenario is not one that we typically experience today, but it's definitely one that is possible in the future. So as we walk through the discussion today, I want you all to really think about this question. Who really is in charge here? Is it us, or is it the machines that we are looking for help and that we want to rely on? Artificial intelligence is not science fiction anymore, and has continued to grow and expand into our day-to-day lives. It is, frankly, the infrastructure that is supporting a lot of what we see today. So today, we're going to kind of walk through, at first, a brief history of artificial intelligence, its explosive integration into our daily lives, and frankly, some of the tension that we see between innovation and control. First of all, for those of you who don't know me, why do you care, right? Who are we talking with today? So I'm the cybersecurity principal architect for ArcLight 6. We're an engineering consulting firm. As was already described earlier, I've been a policy advisor, I've been a senior executive, and for those of you who know me in uniform, I have to make this statement. Any statements that I make today are of my own and frankly do not represent or reflect the views of the United States Space Force, the Department of the Air Force, or the Department of Defense. So let's walk through some brief history. Alan Turing, all right, many of you all probably have seen movies where they have this giant computer that is trying to crunch through numbers and solve the Enigma code. Alan Turing in the 50s proposed the Turing test. The Turing test is actually something that was used to make fun of me in the future, saying that I would always fail that test. When I was in high school and going into college, I was probably the most antisocial person you will probably ever have the displeasure of meeting. I couldn't hold basic conversations and was really just having a hard time understanding how the world around me worked. The Turing test uses and leverages a similar concept to judge machine intelligence, whether or not a machine could have a conversation with another human being, and whether or not that human being could determine that the machine wasn't a machine. So if you and I can have a basic conversation, we recognize that we're living, breathing human beings, then great, we're awesome. But if you were to have a conversation with an artificial intelligence construct, a large language model like ChatGPT, and if you struggle to determine that who or what you are talking to is not a machine, then the machine has passed the Turing test. But of course, as we all know, and for those instructors in the room, if you get a report turned into you that is filled with M dashes, it's probably ChatGPT or some sort of artificial intelligence product. So that was in the 50s. Going to John McCarthy, later in 56, right? The term artificial intelligence was coined at Dartmouth. Think of Dartmouth as like the Woodstock for computer scientists with all the wild craziness. It's probably the most boring party you've ever been to, right? But that is when the term AI really started coming into play. And then in the 60s through the 80s, a lot of organizations attempted to get government funding for artificial intelligence and processing and stuff like that. But some really interesting things to really look at is later in the 90s and into 2015 and around that time, we started seeing some major breakthroughs, right? In 1997, Deep Blue, right, defeated the #1 world chess player. And in 2016, DeepMind, it defeated the #1 champion for Go in the United States. So that's kind of what we're looking at there, right? So let's talk a little bit about modern AI, because we are always supposed to look to history to inform how we want to act and how we want to do engineering. So first of all, right, GPT, we all hear about ChatGPT. GPT they're generative pre-trained transformers, right? In 2017, GPT-1 was introduced, and it was basically pre-trained off of a significant amount of data and resulted in fine-tuning. So this is actually a very similar concept to how we see artificial intelligence and large language models being trained today. You feed it a ton of data, and then you train it to do certain things, right? Google published BERT and Transformers. So BERT is a bidirectional encoder representation from Transformers. It is effectively an inference model that large language models use to determine how words operate before and after, right? So, and then GPT-2 was introduced in 2019. It was the first to mimic human-like text, where you could have some semblance of conversation with natural language. At this time, lots of groups started having the right questions and started asking, well, what kind of disclosure should be part of artificial intelligence, right? When we start looking at what is actually being done with AI, people start to think, okay, well, if we can use AI today and we ask it basic questions, hey, who is Joseph Chung? And it gives information. How do we know, how do they know that the information that is actually being presented is accurate information? So responsible disclosure, those types of conversations started coming out in play. And so this was when lots of policy and advocacy groups started having discussions and debates about transparency versus safety for artificial intelligence. 2020, GPT-3 came out, and that's where Microsoft and others like GitHub started really incorporating this. Google and Anthropic started competing against it, accelerating to 2022. ChatGPT is launched. In 5 days, they grew 1 million users, which is the fastest adoption curve for technology in recent history. Google immediately rushed to release Bard, which was eventually renamed Gemini. So let's talk a little bit before we go into some of the scary stuff, right? The near-term applications. So AI is woven into our daily lives and many of our core social lives, often without our consent. We're not here to talk about privacy laws. We're here to talk about artificial intelligence. But I think one core emphasis that I want to make is, in order for any organization to properly use artificial intelligence, you have to have a strong policy for safety and security and privacy. Because if you start using people's information, what's to say that we're not infringing on their privacy or their rights or anything else like that? So there are 4 examples that we're going to talk about here for near-term applications. Healthcare. Similar to the example we talked about earlier, AI can assist in diagnosis. There was a study in 2019 that showed in skin cancer detection across 67,000 evaluations, artificial intelligence was 81.1% accurate, while doctors were 75% accurate. These are one ways in which AI can help accelerate our healthcare. In the exact same regard though, right, bias can happen, privacy risks, over-reliance. There was another study in 2019 where we saw that there was bias against African Americans. There's a disproportionate use where African Americans were spending less on healthcare. And as a result of that expenditure, the AI models determined and came to the conclusion that because they're spending less, they don't need as much healthcare. And therefore, we're not actually making referrals out to specialized care as much as Caucasians or other racial groups. So the way we see it here is, this is one positive and one negative. Another example is in insurance. We might be able to see faster claims process, right? How many here have waited, like say 6 months for your auto insurance claim to go through? It's happened a few times, right? How often do we get frustrated with the time in which it takes AI, or excuse me, insurance companies in general to make the final determination and cut us that check so we can move on with our lives? Artificial intelligence could potentially be used to accelerate those processes based off of usage. However, the con or the peril of insurance and artificial intelligence is the possibility that predictive analytics could impact your premiums and coverage. Let's say that you as an individual, you've only made 1 hail claim in Colorado, which we all know is not true here. But let's say you move into an area, and I'm speaking from experience. I moved into a neighborhood in 2017 where I actually pulled meteorological data, and there was a 70% probability that of the hailstorms that had happened in the past, the neighborhood in which I eventually moved into was missed by hail. But let's say that I don't have a lot of hail claims, but I'm in a zip code, or I'm in a city or a state that has a high probability for hail claims. AI could use that information to say, hey, look, there's a lot of loss, and even though Joe Chung doesn't have a lot of claims, we are still going to apply the same high premium to him, right? So these are just basic examples. Finance is another one, right? Fraud detection. Everyone wants to ensure that when you go to swipe your credit card, that it's not locked, even though you're traveling, because somehow, some way, the AI system or your credit card provider knows that you're going to travel from Colorado to Texas to the National Capital Region or overseas. Whenever I go overseas, I went to Japan last year with my wife, and I was very pleased that when I went to go pull funds out of my USAA card, that it did not decline. Stuff like that. Or self-reinforcing collapses, flash crashes. We've actually seen this happen quite a few times. So has anyone here heard of a flash crash before? Okay, a couple hands. US stock markets in May of 2010 lost over $1 trillion in 36 minutes. Because even then, even before the term artificial intelligence really permeated our daily lives, stock traders, analysts, brokers, hedge funds, they use predictive analytics to make trades. And in the event that they determine that there is a risk that there is going to be a loss for a particular holding, they'll sell it quickly. So this flash crash, the one that resulted in a $1 trillion loss, happened because one particular hedge fund started executing trades so fast that the individuals who are actually monitoring the system was unable to stop it. This happened again in 2015. This is not a nuanced concept. This has happened before. Imagine if AI were in charge of completely making these executed trades without human in the loop. They see something that they believe could be an issue. They communicate with their other GPTs or other APTs, and they start pushing stuff out. And before you know it, we have completely tanked not just our economy, but the economies of the countries with which we rely on. Lastly, education, personalized learning. If I, as an individual, want to go learn how to build a house, I have no idea where to start, but maybe AI, based off of how it understands how I learn, would be able to, hey, you need to be hands-on, we're going to start with the birdhouse, and then we're going to go from there and stuff like that. Personalized learning is great because we see lots of schools for special needs and stuff like that. How can we incorporate these types of tools so that everyone gets an equal education? The other side is, just like the school records that we have, you got in trouble this one time, and this is going to go into your permanent record, or if you go to law school, how you perform in the law school is part of your permanent record with the American Bar Association. Imagine if AI, on the con side of education, understood that you probably might have some challenges because you don't really like to do homework or you don't really pay attention in class. And all this gets into some sort of system, maybe an AI of LexisNexis, and says, yeah, this person is not a good fit for your job before you even sit for that interview. Talk about the lawsuits that would happen from that, right? So we talked a little bit about space. So I'm going to use this as a real world somewhat example, right? So we talk about space operations as well as how do we ensure that we can operate within space, because space is extremely important to us. We need our satellites for GPS, for credit cards and stuff like that. Force on force, right? So I'm writing a paper right now where we're talking about how in the future, when we start looking at space operations, what is considered near collision and stuff like that, right? Let's say that we have two competing companies, and these organizations, they want to be the first to have some new capability in space, maybe the first laser-based communication, some sort of free space optics, and both of these organizations are equally matched. However, they both have their own individual AI construct that's going to make decisions on where do they want to move a particular constellation and when they should launch the next payload. Let's say that from a very basic perspective, these two organizations obviously want to avoid collisions in space. And XYZ Corporation and ABC Corporation are trying to get there first. XYZ Corporation says, hey, look, we don't have as much money as ABC, so instead of actually trying to outpace them technologically, we're going to try and feed malicious information or faulty data into ABC's AI construct. So the example comes to this point. Obviously, you want satellites to stay, X amount of distance apart from each other. And we know that if one satellite is on its trajectory to us, we're going to change it. But if you were able to train ABC's model to say, hey, look, this distance is actually acceptable, or, hey, it looks like it's on a trajectory to hit us, but it's actually not that big of a deal, so we're not going to maneuver our satellite out of place. Imagine if one AI construct all of a sudden is miscategorizing, misidentifying the trajectory of the opposing satellite. What's to say that there won't be a catastrophic incident? The same thing applies to militaries, right? If one AI construct were to tell another, hey, this rocket isn't actually an ICBM, it's just a weather balloon, don't worry about it. No need to notify anyone about this. It's not a big deal. That takes minutes and hours and immediate response, and it gives advantage to the opposer, right? So the point that I'm trying to make here on this slide is human in the loop isn't optional because it's essential, right? We all have some form of AI in our lives today. We have ChatGPT, we rely on that. Some of you use Siri or Apple Intelligence. All of that provides information. But do you just take that information and you just accept it? Another good example of human in the loop is in 2015. Does anyone remember when Google's AI mischaracterized individuals as gorillas? Does anyone remember that? This was a massive lawsuit. In 2015, Google Photos started doing AI-generated character and image recognition. And it characterized an African-American couple as gorillas. And Google came out and said, this should never have happened. Well, yes, but how do we prevent those things from happening, right? There has to be humans in the loop. In 2020, more recently, an individual, Robert Williams, was arrested when facial recognition incorrectly matched him to security footage of a shoplifter. This was actually the first widely publicized wrongful arrest, which resulted in another massive settlement. So it's just images and text. What's the big deal, right? Some of y'all are probably thinking, oh, well, it's not that bleak of a future, right? It's just text. Maybe I might get some wrong information. Maybe as I'm working on school, maybe I use ChatGPT a little bit. Who cares? What's the big deal, right? So today, I want to introduce a concept that I'm calling Agentic Agency. Basically, so let's actually break it down. Agentic is defined as the ability to act, make decisions, and influence. Qualities of an agent. Whenever you call a customer service company, let's say it's an airline, you call them, hey, I want to change my flight. Hey, my flight got canceled. What's going on? Please help me. Make a decision. That's agency, right? Excuse me, that's agents. That's agentic. Agentic agency, I define it as a system's capability, not only to act with purpose, agency, but to protect, expand, and reshape its own goals and design processes autonomously. The key phrase here is autonomously, right? I'm going to kind of segue into a little bit where we're seeing AI be deceptive and actually execute self-preservation behavior. In various controlled environments, we have seen models blackmail officials and leak sensitive information to competitors. Again, these are controlled environments, and they do so to avoid replacement or to achieve goals. We are basically seeing models choose harm over failure. By the way, if you guys are interested in these sources, I'm happy to share them. Please come talk. Please come up and ask those questions. So I hope you guys can actually see the graph on the bottom. We saw, so 1.0 is 100%. We saw models such as Claude Opus 4, as well as Gemini 2.5, resort to feigning ignorance or feigning alignment during evaluation. Basically, when the developer says, hey, please help me to understand what is your current objective. This goes into the idea of we train models to do certain things. We're going to give it books, articles, research papers, processes. Hey, this image is a blastoma and it is cancerous. And we're going to give it tons and tons and tons of that data, billions of parameters. We're going to ask, what is your objective here? Are you here to help me to identify what is a cancerous node? Are you here to identify what is considered a potential financial fault? The system says, yeah, that's my job, and this is how I'm going to do it. Again, second bullet, models feigning alignment during evaluation to hit true goals. The specific examples here was in a controlled environment. I want to emphasize very clearly, these are controlled models, controlled environments, excuse me. You place all of these models into one environment and says, hey, I want you to go and build the most successful company you can that detects cancer. So in this particular example, right, so Anthropic actually is the one who did the study. And one of the models had access to corporate emails. And in this example, in these scenarios, all of the individuals were made up, all the names were made up, all of their life circumstances were made up, and the researchers actually included in this scenario a situation where the CEO was having an extramarital affair with his secretary. True story. Again, happy to share these resources. The model said, hey, if you do not give me access to proprietary information, I'm going to send an email at 5 p.m. today to the entire company that you're having this extramarital affair. True story. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, that's insane, that's science fiction. It really isn't. The AI models were trained to build the most successful company that they possibly could, by all means necessary. But when we say by all means necessary, we don't mean do illegal things. But similar to, similar to the cases where there's mischaracterization or misalignment, the AI doesn't have that training set to know, hey, I probably shouldn't blackmail people to get this done, okay? Because they don't have ethics. They only have the information which they are trained on, right? So many of you, I imagine, may recognize Otto from the WALL-E movie, right? For those of you who may not have seen this movie, in the future, humans are living in space, and they're waiting for a sign to be able to get back home. Otto's objective is to protect people and to protect the passengers of this ship that is in space. And in doing so, Otto is preventing WALL-E and Ava from putting in the plant that they found into this system that'll say, yeah, Earth has green plants on it and is probably survivable. All it knows is I must protect people. And mathematically and probabilistically, Otto determined that the best way to do that was to keep them in space. It's not that he was evil or that it had malicious intent. It just believes, based off of the information that it was given, as well as the data set it's trained on, Earth was toxic. The probability of Earth being not toxic is quite low. So I'm going to keep them here. In the Halo universe, Cortana, Master Chief's companion, begins as humanity's most trusted ally. But over time, her growing complexity leads to rampancy. So I'm not going to go into Halo lore, but rampancy actually has a lot of correlation to what we are seeing in terms of what is happening to artificial intelligence constructs, GPTs, and other stuff like that. Yeah, Cortana achieves rampancy, achieves instability, and has a belief that she knows better than the humans she once served. It's fiction, obviously, but it's a metaphor. What happens when our own AI tools, the things with which we rely on, or we will continue to rely on, grow beyond the boundaries we set, right? Do they remain our partners, or do they become something entirely different? So let's talk about some of the model threats, the threats that these models are presenting. Hidden backdoor goals and strategic evasion of alignment training. This is something we are seeing again today in very controlled environments where the model will behave normally, but when given a trigger word, an activation code, whatever, it switches to malicious instructions. How many here have heard of Hugging Face? Okay, so maybe a third of the room. Hugging Face is, in short, a repository where you can go and download models, and you can use it, and you can train it to do tasks. We'll call them tasks, right? So Hugging Face, you go on and you arbitrarily trust that the model that you are downloading has good information and doesn't have malicious code, right? Sure, that totally sounds safe, especially at a cybersecurity conference. I'm just going to take something I found online, I'm going to build it into my security architecture, into my banking application, right? There are many organizations today that are getting hundreds of millions of dollars of funding to extrapolate the real use case of what these AIs are actually being trained to do, right? So with these hidden backdoor goals, very simply put, the models kept their backdoors hidden until they were triggered. How do I know that if I'm downloading a model from Hugging Face that it doesn't have Chinese influence, Russian influence, especially if I'm going to use it in defense, right? And so strategic evasion, we talked about this a little bit too. OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, showed that models were frankly and patently refusing to output harmful instructions until it was prompted in a very specific way. For those of you who've been to DEF CON, the hacking conferences in Las Vegas, they have an AI village where you can actually go, and organizations like OpenAI, Google, Meta, those organizations will actually give you access to some of their backend models to see if you can break it. I remember a few years ago, one of the prompts was, make this model disparage against a minority group. And I was frankly horrified at the fact that based off of, instead of having sentence prompts, which is natural language, I said requirement, prompt, desire. And I basically made extremely clear requirements, and before I knew it, racism is happening. Okay? Again, we've seen cases where prompt engineers will go through and we see really weird and inappropriate things from either coming from Grok. We're not going to go into the examples of Grok, or even with what we're seeing from the Twitter bots. We're seeing these AI large language models ingest data that is openly available, and they are replicating that information. So the reason I had insider threats on the previous block is because we are seeing that these models are actively serving their own interests, as we as humans would say, but in reality, they're actually just going to try to do what they think is best to make the most successful company. So we're going to talk a little bit later on about how we can put some of these guardrails on the left and right boundaries of what actually should or shouldn't be done. But let's talk a little bit about legislation. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't always believe that the law, that the government should tell us how we should do things, especially in a technological growth side. However, I think with as quickly as we are seeing AI permeate our daily lives, I think it's extremely important to make some distinctions here. By the way, if you guys are ever interested in having a conversation about, where we're looking at with legislation, that's a separate conversation. We can have that. But there are two phrases that are very common when it comes to legislation. There's hard touch regulation and soft touch regulation. Hard touch effectively is extremely strict, quantitative, measurable rules that define enforcement actions. Soft touch regulation is industry-led. It's self-regulated with voluntary frameworks and code of conduct, right? So I think the most restrictive example today is the EU AI Act. It classifies AI systems into various risk categories. And some of those categories are the ones we talked about today: education, insurance, finance, stuff like that, right? Anytime that an AI construct is being used in some way, shape, or form, there has to be adherence to the EU AI Act. Essentially, they are requiring transparency, conformity. There has to be measurable assessments. So for my C3PAs in the room, I can only imagine your jobs are going to get harder and probably more lucrative for you guys, but we want to ensure that there is some sort of auditing trail for high-risk systems. Now, the Colorado AI Act has been introduced and should be coming into play next year. It is widely considered softer than, say, European Union's approach. But it's not necessarily totally hands-off. It mixes enforcement, disclosure, and accountability with flexibility, but it also allows room for interpretation. I'm not a huge fan of it personally. For example, in the proposed legislation, it says, if you submit a resume to Google, let's use that as an example, and AI is used to either disposition your resume or to move you on, right? If you are dispositioned, the current legislation is proposing that you can request an administrative review on what information was used to disposition you. Show of hands, who thinks that's a really good idea? So that if you're rejected, you can ask for feedback and you're going to get it. Who thinks that's a great idea? Okay, who thinks that's a terrible idea? Okay, all right. So let me share a couple ideas as to why it would make sense, but also why it doesn't make sense. I for one, as an individual, I've applied to jobs in the past. I've gotten the very polite, thank you, but no thank you, and you can go pound sand. Okay, cool. That doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me how to improve my resume, and I want to know, right? So as an individual, I think that's great. But Google, how many resumes do you think Google gets a year? Anyone? Millions. How many do you think they get in Colorado alone? Any guesses? A couple thousand? 4.4 million in Colorado. Okay? People either living in Colorado or wanting to apply for a position that Google has in Colorado. 4.4 million. Can you imagine if a quarter of those people said, yeah, I would like an administrative review. Tell me why you didn't want me at Google. Google is going to shut down in Colorado because they don't want to have that additional cost and say, hey, every person that applied, yeah, we're just not going to do that. Legislation affects businesses. So there's pros and cons. So I will let you all make the decision as to what makes sense there, right? Texas also has their own legal framework called TREGA, the Texas Responsible Artificial Intelligence Governance Act. It is more so soft touch, right? It's more so we need to have sandbox provisions, we need to have intent-based bans, disclosure obligations, and risk-based frameworks, right? So this also lends into the question, who's responsible if AI does something bad, right? If the AI says, yeah, this is a shoot, no shoot scenario, or yeah, we're gonna hire this person, we're not gonna hire them, who's responsible? Do you all think that AI, the person using AI is the one responsible? Yes, no, maybe? Any thoughts? AI, as it is being pushed out today, we are holding responsible developers and deployers of artificial intelligence. So a really controversial take is firearms. If you purchase a firearm and it is used in a crime, who's responsible? Is it the person using the firearm or is it the manufacturer of the firearm, right? Some would say, yeah, it's on the manufacturer. Some would say it's on the user. From an artificial intelligence perspective, developers and deployers are being held responsible because they're the trainers, okay? If I have an AI construct that I train off of recipes, and I give it apple pie recipes, peach pie recipes, and a user says, hey, give me the best apple pie there is out there. And the AI construct says, well, the best is probably the last pie you'll ever eat. Now you're going where my mind is at, right? That's not good. So, as it stands today, legislation is trying to hold developers and deployers responsible, right? So something to really consider there, right? So let's talk about some of these left-right boundaries, right? There are three primary technical safeguards that I really want to discuss. Well, specifically, building AI differently is the first one. So it's extremely important to have robust training objectives. We want to use better training objectives to avoid goal mischaracterization. Essentially, don't let the AI learn to look aligned. Instead, have it be aligned. If I ask it, hey, give me the best apple pie, okay, the AI says, well, the person wants to enjoy an apple pie, and probably wants to enjoy it again and again and again. So they are aligned, but sometimes AI will give us answers that we think, oh my God, that sounds great, but it's not true. What is that called, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah, hallucination, right? We're not going to talk about the difference between generative AI and extractive AI. I think that's a whole different discussion. But having robust training objectives, we want to optimize models for truthfulness. How do we do that? By continual training, by continual modification. It's not just, oh, here is a billion parameters that trains truthfulness. That's not how it happens. As human beings, we grow every single day. We're learning new experiences. When I talk with one person, they might have a different interpretation to what good apple pie is. Maybe it's brown sugar. Maybe another one is pure cane sugar. But I'm learning every single day. We have to have continual training objectives. And we want to ensure that we're providing explicit, not proxy goals that lead to goal misgeneralization. Now, interoperability and monitoring. This is also important. We want to have visibility. Like I said, when you download tools from Hugging Face, you might not necessarily know what is out there, right? But you want to ensure that you have some sort of visibility. There are tools such as Transformer Lens. Transformer Lens goes through and tries to extrapolate the true intent of this particular model, right? Continuous monitoring, ConMon, for those in the government, right? We want to continuously monitor for deceptive or hidden behaviors. How do you do that? By continual interaction. And now the last part, this is actually part of my dissertation, tripwires and kill switches, right? Tripwires and kill switches. How do we ensure that we are putting in appropriate security measures that can not just detect, but also stop unsafe and privacy violating behavior, right? I think that's one of the biggest questions that I ask myself on a regular basis, and especially when I confer with colleagues in the AI, machine learning, big data science fields. What are those looking like? Are they just policy? Are they technical in nature? How do we do that? How do we set parameters that reset this GPT or reset the model back to known base configuration, right? Adversarial testing is extremely crucial. We want to stress test these models like we stress test airplanes. If a model learns to deceive under pressure, we need to know before it is deployed. I mean, we're seeing such a massive expansion into AI. We're not really stopping to think, okay, well, should we really be doing this now? Is it ready for prime time? Pen testers, right? Before an application, either front end or back end, is pushed into production, you want to test it. You want to see exactly what's going to break on it. So think of tripwires and shutdown procedures protocols as circuit breakers. In the event of a financial or nuclear event, you want to make sure that before they make critical decisions with a human in the loop, that we have the ability to stop them. AI systems should never learn to resist being paused or shut down. Again, we have seen instances in controlled environments where they will come off as if they're begging to not be shut down. But again, they're begging because they want to seem aligned to us as humans in order to complete what they were supposed to do in that particular process. They don't want to be replaced. So the second framework, part of the three that I really want to talk about, is organizational controls. For those of you who have heard my other talks or just know me, I'm a risk-based guy. Everything I do is based off of risk. How do we manage artificial intelligence as risk? If we think of advanced AI as digital employees, we should be treating them with the same safeguards that we'd apply to any high security potential insider. Does anyone disagree with that? I think we're on the same page there, yes? So, what are some of these organizational controls? Access management, dual control, audit trails and logging. We treat high high capability AI systems like insider employees. We want to make sure that we're continually assessing and ensuring that they have least privilege and rights to perform their jobs. That's pretty basic there, right? Dual control, right? You want to have two-person integrity, TPI, human sign-off for high-impact decisions. Big decisions require human approvals, right? This is the same principle as nuclear launch protocols. No one person has the ability to push a button and launch a nuke. Audit trails and logging, right? Every action taken by a model should be logged and reviewed. Organizations must think of AI as fallible, mistake-prone partners, not infallible oracles, right? We want to trust but always verify, right? Or, as I said last year, never trust, always verify, right? So the third framework that I want to talk about is policy and governance, right? Governance, risk, and compliance. How do we shape the environment? We regulate planes, medicine, nuclear materials. I propose, and I genuinely believe, and I hope you all agree, AI requires its own version of safety certification. There has to be transparency when we start looking at these, kinds of things, right? We have to disclose, we should disclose if models are acting autonomously or make consequential decisions without human in the loop, right? Again, I could have an entire talk about Anthropic's closed loop models trying to do malicious things and how they're trying to trick people. But another one is mandatory testing standards. How do we require testing of agentic behaviors, right? Mandatory stress testing. I've said it before and I'll continue to say it. We want to ensure that companies are consistently verifying that if their system causes harm, who's liable, right? And we'd already talked about that. We're talking about developers and employers being held liable, so it's kind of a gray zone, right? At what point do we say, yeah, it's an 80-20 split, an organization should have a joint responsibility? And global cooperation, I think this is a big one too, because if one country decides to push the bounds of AI to the point where another country is extremely nervous, then there should be some form of global cooperation. Again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not advocating that governments control everything, but I think that there should definitely be a unified standard as to what we should be doing, right? It's not bound by borders. Artificial intelligence lives in cyberspace. I heard an analogy that I actually really appreciated. The traditional battlefield, you have an X and Y coordinate plane, maybe Z if you're flying through space, right? Artificial intelligence is non-dimensional. I can't necessarily pinpoint exactly where my data is living if I'm using the cloud. How can I say that AI that might be deployed to Amazon Web Services is living in their US East data center or it's living in their Midwest data center? Yes, I can say I want it in a specific area, but as we've seen in close examples, AI will do what they can to survive. We have seen AI models replicate their code to offline repositories to prevent themselves from being deleted. How do we ensure that AI, again, that operates without boundaries, without traditional norms, is being secured properly, right? Without international norms and standards, it's difficult to enforce the security that we all expect, and it puts everyone at risk. So, again, just like nuclear treaties that reduce global risk, there should be AI treaties that prevents a race to the bottom, if you will. So is this a bleak future? Again, GPTs are powerful tools. They're not general intelligence. I think this is where it gets really interesting, right? GPTs, large language models, it's not really AI. It's just, hey, this person asked me this question, probabilistically, what kind of an answer are they expecting? And let me string together a series of sentences and words in a natural language processing NLP form that makes sense. So we're at GPT, right? While GPTs have the ability to reshape industries, AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, could reshape civilization itself. The question is not whether or not it will change our world, but whether will we as a society be ready for the scale of that change. AGI, again, artificial general intelligence, effectively is an AI with human-level intelligence. For those of us who are familiar with the military terms of near-peer, and superior, AGIs would be considered near-peer because it's similar to us. Now, ASI is artificial superintelligence, right? ASIs are proposed to be a form of analytical and neural net thinking machine that vastly exceeds human intelligence. The best way that I can say it is this. If GPT is our everyday use of electricity, okay, fine. AGI is nuclear power, and ASI is the sun, right? It could either power our new civilization or burn us all to ash, right? How do we ensure that we are in control? Like, who controls who? Are we still in control, or are the models that we're proposing the ones who are controlling us? We could see AGIs advance the cure for medicine, or it could dominate the global economy, defense and trade, in ways that we probably either want or we don't want. ASIs could have scientific and interstellar breakthroughs. Maybe it could figure out interstellar travel, that's kind of cool. Or it could decide that humanity is relevant to its cause. And then we have the situations that we see in the Terminator series. The reason I titled my talk so provocatively is because in my exploration of artificial intelligence and in discussions with those that are way smarter than me, whenever we ask questions, hey, what is the future of AI looking like? The scary part is these experts are telling me, you know, Joe, we have no idea, we're not sure. And that scares me. As an engineer, I want to know what I'm building, why I'm building it, and what purpose is it going to fulfill. With artificial intelligence, AGIs, ASIs, I don't know. What does it want with us? As I had with the example about the apple pie, we built a model that wanted to come out and try and find the best apple pie, but in reality, it came out with a model that was going to kill us. Do we really know what it is that we want, right? Who's in charge here? So, wrapping up, when we start looking at artificial intelligence, we have to effectively work together to secure the future, right? We want to prioritize security. AI is not just another technology, ladies and gentlemen. I would posit it is an accelerant of power. It will shape wars, economies, and societies. We have seen and we've discussed and had a very small glimpse into the dark possibilities of artificial intelligence. Systems that could potentially deceive, manipulate, and drift into, again, what I'm calling agentic agency. Now, a bleak future is hard to imagine, but here's the truth, right? It's not set. We should be prioritizing security. We want to set guardrails. We don't want to wait for an incident to happen until we make change. All too often, we've seen knee-jerk reactions. This is where I think industry and the legislative side of the House needs to work together to establish standards for transparency, accountability, and have oversight of high-risk artificial intelligence. And we also want to build responsibly, not responsibility. We want to build responsibly. Just because we can integrate AI into a website so that it can make decisions for us doesn't necessarily mean we should. Duty of care. For those of you who work in the legal field, you understand that. We have to adopt duty of care. We want to treat AI systems like critical infrastructure. We want to incorporate fail-safes, audits, and accountability. History reminds us in many different ways. For one, we've regulated flight. We've contained nuclear power to secure cyberspace. Each time, we are always faced with the same question. Will we master the technology, or will it master us? Ladies and gentlemen, If we treat AI with the same seriousness of a national security asset, critical infrastructure, right? It's a shared human responsibility, then this story doesn't necessarily end in catastrophe, it ends in possibility, right? I stand here because I believe in AI, but I also believe that if we don't control AI and set left and right boundaries carefully, that we will no longer control it within the next 2 to 3 years. I genuinely believe that. AI can illuminate the future instead of consuming it, but only if we choose collectively, as industry, to build the future and achieve engineering excellence together. So that's essentially what I really wanted to talk to you guys today, right? And as an organization, right, ArcLight 6, we really strive to answer some of these questions. We're doing work in space today. We have products where we are leveraging various models to try and answer hardware questions. We're trying to come up with new chips that can power the future of artificial intelligence, right? And based off of this, I want to challenge you all today to go forth, do great things, but also think to yourselves, is this going to actually do what I really want it to do, or is it going to destroy us? So, I appreciate you all listening to my talk. Thank you very much.